Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. Now, in September 2022, I was lucky enough to board a flight to Vietnam, where I'd be jumping in swamps, climbing up hills, and taking on one of the toughest challenges with an entire group of incredible, crazy, quirky, amazing, and inspiring individuals who I'm lucky enough to call my friends, as we all went over and took part in SAS Who Dares Wins. Now, with any kind of TV production, they are always constrained to fit the absolute best bits into a short window of time. So as you won't be surprised to hear, there is so much more to these individuals than meets the eye. So on this mini series of podcasts, you get to listen in as I catch up with this incredible group of people. We discuss the good, the bad, and the ugly as it comes to SAS Who Dares Wins, our favorite instructors, our biggest challenges, and also learn a little bit more about what drives them, what inspires them, and how this journey was for them. It's been so much fun reminiscing and catching up. So if you are sitting comfortably, let's buckle up for safety and get in there with today's episode. I'll see you on the other side.
Hello, just bear with me. Oh, I thought I was on video actually. Just bear with me.
You're okay.
Can you see me now?
We don't use the video anyway, but it's just for our...
All right. I've been training myself this morning, so yeah, no.
What are you training for at the minute? Because I know you're still big into your running, aren't you? You got a couple of
Yeah,
runs
I've got two marathons. I'm gonna be doing well. I've got into Manchester and I've just applied for London, so I've got through. Obviously, because I've got a tight qualifying time, so I'm just waiting for outcome of that on 18th of October. So I'll be doing two, obviously in beginning of next year. So that's obviously I need to kind of start ramping up on volume now.
When did you first start getting into all this running? Because marathon's been a big part of your life now for a little while, hasn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be honest, I loved running as a kid, but you know, because of the situation, obviously being in care and stuff like that, I didn't really have the kind of support to get to all these kind of county events and that type of thing. So I kind of picked it back up again. I were at athletics from being about 9 until 11, and then I kind of picked it up like when I kind of left school, really, because I started a gym, but then when I was at college, I found it difficult, to kind of commit to getting to a gym at a certain time, and they weren't 24/7 like they are now. No. So the only way I could kind of keep fit really and switch off from work was just to go running. So I kind of picked it up really, after leaving school, and then started running, and then, did 10Ks and then half marathons, and then just got into marathons, which I loved. I loved that, kind of the commitment to training, really. It's significant.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together. I think so many people, myself included, forget how much of a factor those, what I want to say are like really privileges are into being able to engage in so many sporting disciplines. I remember reading, have you ever read a book called Bounce?
No, I've not read that now.
No, it's I listened to it on audio, to be fair. I read it to start with, and then I just couldn't get, I'm not a great reader. Written by a guy called Matthew Syed, and he was like an incredible ping pong player. But what it speaks about is a few things. It speaks about the 10,000 hour rule, but it also speaks about like the drop-off levels of what people need to be able to engage in sports. Like you need to live in an area which has these things accessible. Yeah. You need to have time. You need to have resources. I mean, swimmers are a great example, having to go to the pool at 5 a.m. every single morning and stuff like that. Yeah. Having parents that will support that. Cross country, or marathon running, being able to have somebody that would drive you to bloody Lincolnshire or to Birmingham or to Scotland or, congratulations, you're in regionals. Right, I can't fucking get there. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Or even just be able to be in an environment where you're allowed to leave the house on a daily basis or even at the weekends. Those so many factors. And it always fascinates me to think like what the drop-off rate would be of the number of athletes that would make it to Commonwealth or if not even Olympic level. Yeah. Never quite make it there.
Yeah, it's interesting because I kind of qualified at elite standard literally at, like in my 30s. So if I'd have had that, if I, so I represented England, like I've probably, well, over 20 times now in half marathons and marathons, but later in life. And it intrigues me as to, if I could go back and
Yeah,
rewrite that. And the thing is, and I look at it, you need that commitment because we're so busy. Life, it's this presenteeism at work, isn't it? You're so committed to your
oof,
job, and it's
yeah.
like, I run sometimes just literally mentally exhausted, and I think that's my life, because the role that I'm in at work, it's mental. It's never physical exhaustion because I can push myself to a limit physically, but it's the mental exhaustion for me that kind of impacts my life just because of the day-to-day decisions I have to make. And some people would never understand that, but actually it's, if I'm physically mentally right, I can do anything. If I'm not, that's
It's
what
that
impacts my training.
cognitive load, and I think
Absolutely.
it's such a foreign thing for us as now like 21st century humans, because
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
I mean, we're never the biggest or strongest animals on the world anyway, but
No,
we've never
no.
had to operate on such a cognitive level as we do now with all this. Everything's on Zoom, everything's on the PC, everything's on
Yeah,
social media. We
yeah,
are bombarded cognitively
yeah.
on such a level these days that I know what you're saying. Like, after I've done a
Mm.
couple of hours of podcasting and then editing, and then I've got a few meetings on Zoom at
Yeah,
work, and then I've actually got to go into the station at night, and I'm like, I'm mentally just drained, but my body
yeah,
also gets like an
yeah.
uneasy agitation to it because it's got like mixed messages because it feels tired, but it knows it hasn't done anything. So
Yes.
that's where like
Yeah.
you can get a real sense of agitation, and I,
Mm.
I wonder if that's like a weird crossroads where people then indulge in almost like self. Because I think of exercise as a form of self-medicating, whereas some
Yeah.
people will then go to food or drink or
Yes. Yeah.
smoking or whatever their
Yeah.
vice might
Yeah.
be, and that can be a slippery slope, really.
No, absolutely. Yeah. It is interesting because I've been training sometimes and I'll feel exhausted, but then once I've done my session, it's kind of, I get another high. And
You
I
do,
think it's
yeah.
all
You
them
get that runner's high,
endorphins.
don't you? You get
Yeah.
them all those
Yeah.
endorphins, norepinephrine, all of
Yeah.
that, all
Yeah.
of that healthy outlet.
Mm.
When you said you didn't start getting into this running at a higher level until you were in your 30s,
Mm.
just unfold some of that for me.
Mm.
What were some of the big blockers? Because you've alluded to it there that you obviously you grew up in care.
Mm.
I am not going to pretend to understand how much that must have had an impact on you when you were younger.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, the thing is, I think, the way that care impacted me is, so I would kind of split up from my family. So there's four girls in my family, so I'm the third of four.
Okay.
So I was taken into care at 9. So and the younger two. So I've got one that's a year younger and one that's a year older. So one was 8 and one was 10. But then I've got a sister that's kind of 9 years older.
Okay.
So I was quite close to the two that were, a year either side of my age. So to be kind of taken into care and then broken up as a family and not really know where they're living other than, oh, well, you're living in Pontefract, they're living in Wakefield. And that is a battle itself. You kind of, it's change. So, do you really accept change at that young age? Well, no, you're taken away kind of from your family, even though your family's dysfunctional and there's lots of issues there. And, in my case, it was kind of substance abuse and alcoholism. But that's my norm. So I'm kind of taken out of that environment now where that's kind of my norm really, and into an environment where I'm kind of living in a care home, and actually not knowing anybody there. That care home being actually run like a military operation versus my life where I could be out until 11 o'clock at night and nobody'd question what I was doing. So that
Right.
having to kind of come to terms with that, and then kind of moving to new schools and not quite knowing
How did
people.
you say coming to terms with it? Sorry, but how would you come to terms with that? And why were you not kept with your sisters at such close ages?
Because the problem is, it's just that it's at that time, kind of, if you look at supply and demand, if you want it, the
Just wasn't
facilities are
room
just
for
not
three
there.
girls at the same
So
place.
yeah, so one of my sisters went into an emergency foster family, but they only had one placement, for example, so they didn't have placements for 3. Another one went into another care home, and then ended up in another care home, and it weren't that, nowadays the kind of the strategies are to keep children together as families. But
Yeah.
back in, you're talking early 80s, kind of 80s at this point, and that were not really that kind of strategy. If you want, it would just get kids into just get them out of a risky environment and just get them into whatever, because that's going to be
Yeah,
best for
yeah.
the child, but not having kind of all that kind of understanding on the impact of you mentally and physically as well.
You've also developed quite a lot by the time you're that age. I mean, my daughters, you've got, how old are your children now? Because I think your son's
10 and 11, yeah, mine are
yeah, I was
10
going
and
to say your children are the
yeah,
same age as mine. So
yeah.
my daughter's 10. They've got their whole personalities then. They're very, they've grown a lot. They've taken a lot on board. They've started to develop who they are as a person. So it was really quite a pivotal age to be moving outside of the home environment and trying to integrate with a whole new dynamic. You said the care home that you went to was very militaristic.
Yeah.
What was it like in a day-to-day trying to change and transition into something like that?
And well, compounded by it being like a military environment, but also, children that, were self-harming, and it's not something that anybody talked about, but, the police always being around there, children, kind of getting into trouble for, kind of getting in fights. So it was, even though it was kind of this militaristic environment, it was so dysfunctional to some extent that you just could never settle there. You just never knew, you'd got doorbells, police turning up, doorbells, ambulances turning up. And it was kind of turmoil, really, and trying to, settle into a room where I didn't know anybody. And,
How many kids would there be in a room there? What sort of setup was
well,
it?
I were in a single room, but there were 20 children in that care home. But every child had a need, whether that was kind of support for alcoholism, believe it or not, children that were teenagers, they're drunk excessively, other children having drugs. It was just a horrible environment, and when you're around that environment and that negativity, it really does have an impact on you as an individual, because one, you just don't want to be there. Secondly, in relation to, at that time, care workers weren't like members of your family. It's kind of what I experienced is they didn't really want to be there. It were a job and that was it. No empathy for, your kind of needs.
As long as you're breathing and you've got food.
And that's it. And that's just how it felt. So it just felt like, and I would never, it was just an institution. It was just, so compounded by then moving to a new school and not knowing anybody and not particularly liking the school. I just felt like kind of overwhelmed by everything that were happening in my life.
How did you deal with that then? How did you not turn into them same habits? Did you? I don't know. What was your coping mechanism for that?
Well, it's really interesting, really, because again, because you reflect on your life when you've got your own children, and like you said, I looked at my children when obviously they were 9 when I was first taken into care, and how innocent they are, and how like you said, they start building their own characters, and I think the experience that I had, to be honest, Pete, was that I felt let down continuously. I'd gone from being a really, absolutely outstanding pupil at school in the primary school that I was in. I was captain in the netball teams. Not only at that point, I was in year 4, 5, just transitioning actually. And, I played in the kind of year 6 netball team because I wasn't naturally good at sport. I felt part of a team. And then, I kind of and that kind of motivated me because I was very good at maths and I was very good at science. I'd moved to this new school, and it's kind of, I didn't really kind of get on with the teachers. I didn't get on with the pupils. So it was kind of internal battle, really. And it just felt, I'd kind of got no purpose in life. So I'd disengaged from education. So I'd kind of gone from what a superstar student to absolutely just not even engaging with education. Then, kind of picking up, sports. They didn't do netball, which is the sport that I'd loved, at that time. They didn't do that at the school. We played hockey. I didn't really like hockey, but I played it, because I did like being part of the team, but it weren't my first choice in sport. So it's kind of when I look back, not having that kind of support in the children's home for, being involved in school activities, or even being able to go to after school activities, and then feeling like they were never really bothered about whether you succeeded in life or anything like that. That kind of totally disengaged me. And then having this lack of visibility or understanding what were happening with my sisters, I don't know. I just kind of switched off to everything, really. And it probably sounds a bit bizarre, but it was just surreal. I can't, it's a dark part of my life.
It sounds unreal, yeah. And I'm wondering if, like, as I listen to you there, this sense of, being a great student and performing so well at the sports when you were at that previous school, what was the sort of validation, or what was the reaction from your parents when you did good at school or when you performed well in sports? Was there any reward metric there? Because it seems like that was a way to to feel like you had success and perhaps feel like you were making progress or something in life. And there's so many factors, so many of your anchors were kind of snatched away in that period of time.
No, it's interesting because I mean, it was my mum, my maternal mum, but it was a stepdad. And to be honest, not one of them were really interested in me excelling at sport. What intrigued me actually when you asked that question is it was other people's parents that were like really giving me positive feedback. So I think it was that positive
Right, that,
reinforcement. Saying, you know, you've got a really natural
yeah, I
talent.
see what you're
Really
saying. You
good.
want that sense
Yeah,
of
yeah,
love or acknowledgement from your own parents, but you'll get it from anywhere. We all kind of sometimes people get it from a coach, or we get it from
yeah,
a neighbor or a friend's parent, and
mm,
that then perpetuates that behavior where you're like, okay, this is
yeah,
where I can be successful in life.
yeah. So it was more that kind of acknowledgement from other people's parents, you know, that came to watch us play netball. And in fact, one of the girls, her mum used to take me to when I was at that school to the kind of tournaments on a weekend and stuff. So it was, you know, them kind of acknowledging that we're doing
Yeah,
well as well.
that's crazy. So how long were you in care for? What age would you have come out of
From
care?
Well, I was in care from 9, and then up to 15. I'd been in and out of, you know, different children's homes, and then in within that period of time, or in over 50 kind of foster homes. But then I ended up getting fostered by my best friend at that time with her mum and dad, and they're the family that I class as my family now. So at 15, that's when
15.
so it was from 9 until 15, and then I went into the kind of private care with my best friend's parents, because she'd kind of left. She was slightly older than me. She'd been married and she was living in Germany, so her mum and dad, they were willing to kind of foster me at that time. So they're the people now that I class as my kind of family.
That's
Mm.
amazing for them to have done that, to be fair, because even
Oh,
then we're
absolutely.
talking
Yeah,
mid to late 90s, which is
yeah,
still, the
yeah,
care sector is still, I mean, it's still not in a great place these
yeah,
days, really, but and then it's still very much in its infancy.
yeah.
How much of a shift change was that for you in perhaps getting
Mm.
a bit more of a grounding, getting some sort of semblance of those foundations? But it must have been so hard to trust people by that point, though, because
Oh yeah.
you'd been
I mean,
fucked around so much, you'd been your sense of relying on other people or your sense of trusting other people must have been almost such a weak muscle
mm.
that it was hard to even exercise that trust with anybody.
Oh, so I don't think I trust anybody, to be honest. At that, at that point, it's kind of before I'd moved into into that final foster home. The one before that turned around and what did she? I said, right, I want to go to college, and I want to do. I'd got ambitions of wanting to go into army, and all I ever got told is that, oh, you'll never get those qualifications. My daughter's got grade A's, but I doubt that you're going to get anything. So it's kind of, I would. It's like nobody ever, even though when I had ambition, it's kind of everybody knocked me down. So it's kind of that, if you want that level playing field in relation to, telling your kids that they can achieve anything, all I ever got told is, oh, you're going to be nobody, you'll be nothing. And because I would disengage from education, I knew that I weren't stupid as I was being told. I knew that
Yeah.
I knew
Yeah,
that I
you
could
knew
kind
that
of
when you applied yourself, you could do it,
yeah,
and
I
then when you
could,
didn't apply yourself, you didn't do it.
so,
So it's not like
yeah,
you were applying
exactly.
yourself and you didn't get it.
Yeah, because
You
it were
weren't.
extremes with
Yeah,
me. It
yeah,
would
yeah.
it's kind of, and I think that's what I've worked out with my personality. I'm extreme. It's either nothing or everything. There's no in between, and it's interesting as I kind of reflect on my journey. It's either I'm either into something 100% or into it zero. It's extremes, which is bizarre. But anyway, so when I kind of moved in with Pat and George, it's interesting because George had a military career, very successful entrepreneur. He was working in a kind of manufacturing environment and really succeeding in his roles. He'd kind of come out of the military. And for me, for at one point in my life, somebody kind of believed or kind of instilled in me that I could do anything. And it's interesting, just even having a bedroom where I'd got a computer where I could even get online. Well, it weren't
Yeah.
online as in World Wide Web, but access
Yeah,
to
yeah,
be able
yeah.
to do homework.
Resources, and you
It,
could
to, it,
stimulate that
it totally
curiosity.
transformed. And I thought, I can't believe how easy this is compared to living in children's homes where you've got kids ultimately disengaged from education, taking drugs, all this chaos, the kind of label that you get as an individual. We're living in that care home because these kids are druggies, these kids are this, these kids are that. And
Yeah.
I kind of all my childhood I lived on a label. My mum's family were Romanian, so it's like their roots are obviously Romanian gypsies. So
I
I were
was
a
gonna
gypsy.
say, because when I was speaking with Ross, Romani gypsies really have that beautiful jet black hair.
Yeah,
They're always very very attractive people. We'd never had that conversation actually, but now you say it, you
Yeah.
have many of those physical characteristics.
So I relate back to my childhood that, you know, so you're a gypsy. So I went to a Catholic school and it's like everybody's blonde hair, blue eyes. It's like, no, you can't play with gypsies. You know, I was labelled, oh, you're a Banks, you're a failure. You know, I remember once at school, you know, I was 8 and it's kind of, I never did homework at work because, you know, every weekend or every night it would just, you didn't know whether police were going to be in, my stepdad were arrested. It was just this circle of violence and stuff.
Fuck.
And it's kind of, you know, I remember going into school one Monday and just like smashing all these maths exams. And it's like, oh, you can't be that good at that because you're a Banks. And I'm like, oh my God. So it just, you know, it kind of could have totally switched me off, which eventually it did, because it was like that head saying, well, you can't do that because you're this certain label, or you're,
how long,
you know,
before you keep getting told something does it become your own narrative?
you know, so you know, for my dad George, that I call dad now, just for him to say, oh, you can do what you want, you know, you've got to work hard and nobody's going to give you anything, you've got to put that commitment into it. And interestingly, you know, that's what really kind of initiated that kind of that spark for, oh, what can I go on and do? And anyways, as I kind of left school that year and kind of failed every GCSE, I ended up working 3 or 4 jobs. You know, I was a cleaner, I was working as a receptionist in a gym, I was working for Thurston's, which is now Greg's at the time, you know, just kind of cleaning as well, and working at Pound Stretcher, stacking shelves. And I thought to myself, there's got to be more to life than this. And then I'd also got a job, you know, kind of packing meat into meat trays in a manufacturing plant, and it was 12-hour shifts.
I did that.
And it was absolutely ruthless. And I mean, absolutely ruthless. You know, I was absolutely knackered. You know, it was like, you know, things broke down, and 12 hours ended up being 18-hour shifts, you know. And I said, you know, my dad was working in manufacturing at that time, and he was telling me that there was some apprenticeships coming up. As in, you know, you could have a great career, you know, and he was an engineer who was in Rema for 25, 26 years. And I said, well, the thing is, I can't get that because I've not got these grades as in C at the time. I know it's numbers now. You know, you needed minimum of 5.
Yeah.
But anyway, at that point, then I decided to go back to college, and I'd kind of resit my exams. And like I said, having that newfound focus and knowing that, you know, to become an engineer, I had to have these qualifications. I spent that year, you know, as well as working, and I ended up getting like 10 grade A's, which at the time there were no grade A stars, by the way. And I went on and I kind of, I couldn't believe it, because the feedback from the you know, the teachers at college, this is not teachers at school, because I was going to college at this point, further education to reset. And it was like, you know, you've got a real talent for maths, and, you know, you should go, if you're thinking of engineering, you know, you've got that basic understanding. And it just kind of went on from there. And I mean, that year when I got those GCSEs, I ended up getting the apprenticeship that my dad had told me about. And it was, you know, in electrical engineering. And this is kind of, at that point, this is like 1995. And I got into work, and I think it suited me, Pete. I know a lot of kids aspire to go to university, but I very much am a pragmatic person. So I love to learn and I love to see and do. So that apprenticeship absolutely suited me. So we're going to college 1 day a week, and I'm in work 4 days a week, and I'm working with people. I mean, it was a bit difficult because I'm working in a male-dominated environment, and at the time,
absolutely, that factory environment is
a factory environment.
Build your thick skin.
And it's interesting actually, because a point that on obviously when we were in the jungle, Foxy did say something to me like, God almighty, you've got crocodile skin, you know, as in resilience. And I think that comes back to, you know, working in manufacturing and, you know, having these kind of negative experiences. But anyway, so I kind of went on and I did my apprenticeship, and I kind of come out 5 years later, I've got an HNC in electrical engineering. And the company that I was working for had nominated me for kind of a national award. Anyway, I won. I mean, I were up against, you know, people that had been to, you know, that were working for British Aerospace, British Airways, all these kind of blue chip companies. I went down for an interview, did all these tests, and I come out and I won it. And that role, at the time, it was the kind of most promising young female engineer. I was 22. Then I went on 2 years later. They nominated me for UK Young Women Engineer. I won that in 2004. And it's like, it just kind of, you know, my kind of profile were improving, and it's like the work experiences. I kind of get headhunted now at this point, and I ended up moving to Unilever, you know, getting kind of a leadership role there, you know, leading a team of engineers and being responsible for the maintenance of the manufacturing lines. And it's just, it gave me a newfound love for wanting to learn more. And I kind of, you know, at this point, I was picking up these national awards like Higher National Education Gold Award, Telegraph Top 50 Female Engineers. And at that point, I'd kind of gone on and I started studying with the Open University as well. So, because I would never have been able to go to, to college or university full time because I was working at that point and I just couldn't financially, obviously afford to kind of drop the salaries that I were earning. So I've always been a distance learning student. So if I kind of fast forward,
I just want to pause there for a second because there's a really distinctive thing that happens there is up until that point, it sounds as though you had been very much, working on yourself, developing yourself, getting these qualifications, getting this knowledge base, and then to be put in a leadership position. You said there that you were leading teams of engineers. Talk to me about that for a second, because that for me personally, when I moved from being an individual contributor, as they called it in the organization I was in, to then delivering through others or leading others, is a massive shift change. You have to develop a bit more self-awareness and emotional intelligence and the ability to communicate with others. How did you find that fact, that having spent so much time in the environments that you had done to now be leading teams must have been very different?
No, absolutely. I mean, I was, by the time that I'd qualified and I'd got, my qualifications in engineering, I mean, it was a total step change for me because I was an expert, a technical expert, if you want.
Yeah.
And what I found is, when I stepped up to that first leadership role, you talk about individuals learning what motivated individuals, and I think, for me, because I'd kind of dealt with so many different people and, kind of engineers that I worked with, and they were really militant and they were quite unionised. I think having that experience allowed me, if you want, and I've always been open-minded, that not one person kind of thinks the same. But in relation to, kind of motivating people, when an organisation's downsizing, because at that point, obviously, I was working for the organisation and we'd gone through this kind of transformational change program, and it meant that people were becoming redundant because automation was replacing people. So what that meant is that I'd kind of thrust straight into a role where I'd got a team of 25 engineers, and the business said, we're becoming more efficient, we want to lose 5 engineers. And that was an absolutely significant kind of change for me. And what that did is it absolutely impacted morale within the team. People, when you talk about trust, people started not trusting me because it's like, well, hold on a minute, you've come into role. This is, you're coming in and telling us now that this has got to be you that's made these decisions. It can't be the business. So, having to kind of work.
So you got labelled with that?
Yeah, so I was labelled with that as a leader because it's like, well, this must be your idea. Even though we'd kind of gone through presentations about, as an organisation, we're not cost competitive, and we have to, we brought more automation in to be cost competitive. And as an organisation, we have to become more efficient. You and I know that becoming more efficient is less in, more out. But obviously, 100%. Engineers for engineers, leading a team of engineers at that point that are so-called, so kind of technical and logical, it would just not, it was just kind of not sitting in.
We've had similar backgrounds in that respect. I used to work for a fast-moving consumer goods company, and I did I was a CI lead, so continuous improvement. So it was all that Six Sigma Kaizen, probably stuff you've trained in and probably instructed people in. And as much as you're super excited to find a TRS or an efficiency gain or a waste reduction, when that then manifests itself into not requiring as many people because you've streamlined a system, that's when you cross that level into human emotions and you start speaking with people about that. How did you deal with separating that aspect of being labeled and people feeling like these were your ideas and still managing to stay on task, I suppose?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I think this kind of comes back to my childhood, really, you have to, in relation to, your work scenario, what I try to do is be professional and always kind of, you go back to, kind of change concepts and cotters. And for me, it was always about communicating and being honest and open with people, and going back to this, this messaging, this kind of strategic discourse that were coming from the CEO and the senior leadership. I'm in a first line supervisor level, so that's not a senior role. And reinforcing that message because, people weren't trusting. And like I said, it was just coincidental and timing that I took up that role and all this change started to happen. And then, just having more kind of meetings with the team and, going back to the basics about, our competitors are taking more market share. Our cost base is too high. And if we continue at this rate, customers are telling us that they will not renew these contracts. So for me, what seemed pretty logical, it was interesting because I was on that journey thinking, well, how do people not understand this? Why is it so difficult?
Yeah.
And then having to spend time with individuals, spend time with the team and communicating that, because and actually being rational about it in my own mind, because whoever was in that role were going to have to go through this. So it's kind of, I tried not to beat myself up too much, but it did impact me as an individual, because it's like, why is it that people just don't understand? But then I think what I did do is, kind of go back to, that wider kind of support from my manager as well, and just say, look, I need that support, because and we need to get union support in this as well. Unions have signed up to this. Unions have signed up to this prior to even me being enrolled. So I started using that kind of wider network to support me as well, because, to be consistent with that message and set that kind of more strategic justification and reasoning as to why we were where we are as an organisation.
There's a big difference between understanding and acceptance, though, I think, isn't there?
Absolutely.
And it's probably something I'd love to ask your thoughts on, because you had probably started, as you were getting older now and you started to build your own life, you had perhaps started to get a greater understanding for how, and you seem to be really acutely aware of it now, how your upbringing had affected you into that point. Yeah. But when, I mean, if at all, perhaps, I don't know if you can ever really get acceptance for something like that. When did you begin to accept some of the stuff that had happened to you through your journey to be able to transition into, obviously being a mum now and kind of beginning to take control of every aspect of your life, which you never really had before?
Yeah, I mean, it really is interesting, actually. And I think if I kind of reflect on my life, I think what is interesting, well, and I mean, even now, with the economic state, my life through a childhood was always continually changing, and I had to adapt to new environments. I had to adapt to new people. And I think that's why, in that first leadership role, for example, first line leadership role, one of the things that's ingrained in my head is that things constantly change. And it's interesting because in that manufacturing place, and I never understood this, but as I've developed as a leader in industry, the only constant is change. And actually, once you embrace that, and I didn't understand that at 16-year-old, and whether it's it's simple things as moving desk is a change, and it's amazing how people go on that change curve, denial, depression, anxiety, just to move desk. And I think, being that pragmatic person and, having to kind of undertake these kind of leadership training, because I weren't a leader, obviously, in my background in engineering, and putting all those kind of philosophies and concepts into my head and trying to relate to and understanding the psychology of people, and actually, why are people thinking like this? And I think what I have realised, Pete, is that some people will never change. And it's at that point that, that is time when if
change
people
is asserted upon them at that point. If people don't choose to change, change is then put upon them. Because life, as you rightly articulated, life is always changing. And they say, the world is inherited by the learner. The people that always want to do the way it always was will lose everything in life, because it belongs, especially now, like you said, we are going through colossal changes economically, socially, technologically. You've got to be that eternal student.
Oh no, absolutely. And I think that's where I go back to my life as a child. If it's given me anything, it's given me this ability to be able to change and adapt to a situation. So, and I think because of in my own personal life, all I ever saw was negative, and I'm always positive. I never look at a situation negative, even when I've been made redundant. That's a new opportunity for me to grow. That's a new opportunity, for me to showcase to industry what I can deliver, what I've done. So I've never, and I think it's because everything's been so negative. But when I look back to my childhood, it would bleed. We never knew when we were eating. We didn't live with electricity. And I think to myself, life couldn't have really got any worse than that. As a child, not knowing when you're going to eat, not knowing when you're going to, get this electricity, and when you're going to next have a bath because you've not got any hot water. So I always try and go back to basics and the worst point in my life, and that's what So for somebody that's sometimes when I've been with people and in work and in kind of personal friendships, and I think, wow, it's really interesting what you really perceive to be a problem, and that is absolutely menial for me. And it's perspective, and I think that's one of the things about my journey. I'm always willing to look at people's perspective, because that is one of their biggest problems. It might be menial to me, but it's how do you help people along that journey. But in my own life, I think because when you've kind of been rock bottom and nobody's got a motivation to want to have a great career, nobody's even bothered about being off benefits, and I didn't want to be in that environment. It's like, why is it that you don't want to go to work? You know, surely life's about having the best life that you can. So I've come from a total opposite where nobody's had a career and everybody were on benefits, and this type of, you know, kind of attitude, and that's what's driven me to want to be the best kind of person that I can be and contribute to society and help that kind of next generation.
Do you think, because listening to you there, my mind goes crazy, you know, goes in so many directions, because do you think when we speak about value of association and nature versus nurture and stuff like that, do you think you would have had that same level of, we call it drive or realization or, you know, perspective, had you have not been taken out of that environment? So if you had have continued to grow up in that environment and continued with that level of conditioning of looking at the world in that way, you know what I mean? It's a bit like you saying your scars live right close to your superpowers. Do you know what I mean? Would you have had this same, because you would have been a different person ultimately if that had not have been the case.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd have had a total different career path, because I wouldn't have had, you know, like I go back to, you know, Pat and George giving me that opportunity to go to college. I wouldn't have had the career that I've got. I think I'd have still had the motivation, even if it had been still in that manufacturing plant. I'd have still wanted to, you know, kind of perform well in role. You know, when I were at school and when I were on form, like I said, up to being 9, it's like I always wanted to the kind of commitment that I gave once I was at school, it was just at another level, you know. And and it's interesting because I always reflect: is it because of or in spite of? And I don't know the question. I don't know the answer to it. I don't know that, you know. But I knew that I knew that I wanted to work because I knew that I wanted to kind of contribute to society, even though I was so young. And I knew that I wanted, you know, to be able to afford nice things in life. And nice things at the time for me were things just knowing when I was going to eat next. It's, you know, it weren't ever a big castle or a mansion. It was just the simple things that we take for granted. And that's why I wanted to work, so that I knew that I could eat and, you know, kind of survive in life.
What do you think has been, because I always say to people, I always just play a great game. I don't know if you've ever played it, or it's more of a teamwork exercise called Sunshine and Shadows, where you acknowledge one individual's strengths, but also within that strength, i.e. their sunshine, it casts a shadow over some aspect of their life. So you've clearly developed some serious resilience, you know, some serious perspective on how to handle challenges which would cripple other people. What has been the cost of that, if any at all?
Well, it's interesting, really, because I was kind of reflecting on this journey, because just in general, I have had to be kind of selfless in some ways. So it's kind of, I've got some amazing friends, you know, and they've always been part of my life. But it's kind of when I've been in, you know, I sound like I've been in loads of relationships. I haven't, but it's things like, you know, what I've personally found is, like, you know, being in relationships and me being really kind of committed to my role. And, you know, it's like I was an individual, for example, that when the production lines broke down in manufacturing, I wouldn't just walk away because it would clock off, you know, clocking off time. I was very committed to making sure that I was there and learning. So in that respect, you know, as my friends, for example, were going out on weekends, I were working nights, I were working days, 12 hours over weekends. So I never really, you know, through my 20s, I never really had this kind of party lifestyle. I was so committed to the job. And that's, you know, where I think, you know, I've kind of lost some friends because of that. But I wouldn't change it though, Pete. So it's kind of selfless and selfish in some ways, but yet I had to do it to survive, to get my first house, to get my career. Do you know what I mean? And so some people would say, "Oh, you're more bothered about work." It's not. It's not about work. Life's about living, and I couldn't have lived without the career that I'd got. So if I'd have had a family to support me, then, you know, maybe that would have been different. But when you're coming from nothing and you've had nothing, you know, my life, that commitment, and, you know, that's one of the things I've excelled at within my career. And it's very different now because Generation Z, millennials, are very much work-life balance. There were no work-life balance in my life.
I've still not really got any work-life balance now. I mean, it's probably indicative of, well, like when we've been having conversations over this past week, I'm always like, fucking anytime. When should I do? You know, 6 a.m., 10 p.m., weekends, whatever. And so many people would, for better or worse, probably don't have that. I wanted to just zoom in for a second on this factor of, because you said about friendships and relationships and stuff like that. What sort of came to me then was this: you probably didn't have as many fulfilling associations or rewarding associations with the idea of a partner or a friend as perhaps other people would, because you probably, and again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what did you associate with having a partner, with having a friend, because every time you've trusted somebody in the past, or every time you've tried to give or receive love from somebody, I imagine, just from listening to you and obviously having spent some time with you, the only things that have come from that have been pain in the past.
It has been hard. Yeah, it has, and I think kind of, I suppose if you ask people what love means, and it's kind of, for me, I really find love a word that's hard to articulate, because I never. It's like now that when I had my kids, and obviously especially with your first child, it's just like, wow, I got emotions that I'd never had in my
I
life,
was gonna say
and
that must have
it's
been
kind of.
so.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I've never kind of felt those emotions in my life. Because even being part of a family, even your family's criticizing you. The family that I live with, and it's and in fact, it really brought. Even though having my first child, it brought loads of emotions back, really. Because then I thought, how on earth could my mum have a priority never been to look after her kids, or even go to work to look after her kids? So even though it was an amazing time, it was quite a dark time as well. Because I thought, I can't believe that you get a bundle of joy, and then it's not your life priority. So it were quite, however it sounds,
Yeah.
it were quite
It's
negative
like
for
coming
me.
to
But like,
terms with what somebody else must have
oh,
felt, and they
absolutely,
still did the
yeah,
things that they did. Because it's a bit
yeah,
like you said, oh, well,
absolutely,
I'm sure it'll be different when I'm a mom. And then when you're a mom, you're like,
yeah,
holy shit,
yeah.
I could never do that.
And it's like, what I find hard is, what is a normal family? Because I've never, do you know what I mean? I don't,
I don't think there
and
is such a thing.
no,
But
and
no,
that's
yeah.
and that's what amazes me. So yeah, so I do. And I love being around people. By the way, I do love being with people. But I know, I've had kind of feedback that I can be cold, and it's just because I don't want to be let down. So I put barriers up, because I don't want to be hurt again by people. Because when the people that are supposed to love you don't love you, it creates this kind of guard. Your guards up straight away
Yeah,
with
if this
everybody.
person that's supposed to love me, like my mom or my dad, if they're
Yeah,
supposed to chemically,
yeah,
viscerally, from a relationship, they're supposed to, and they don't, then
yeah,
shit, what are you gonna do? Because you don't
yeah,
fucking care if I
yeah,
jump off a bridge tomorrow. You're
yeah,
somebody I work with.
yeah,
So that's I suppose just reinforced that need for those barriers.
yeah. And I do, and I think what I've kind of in life, what I've reflected on is, it's kind of it. And I don't want this to sound bizarre, but I am quite
Oh no,
happy in my own company, because
I love my
I've
own
just had,
company. It's good.
because and a lot of people are scared by that, but I think I've just been on my own for so long, it's hard, and that's what adapting to parenthood. Because even though I'd been in care and this and that, I'd been on my own all my life. I mean, nobody showed me nobody kind of showed me the ropes, really. Do about life and what you do and what you don't? So it's been a bizarre journey, really. And even being a parent, it's like, God, I know it's going to sound strange, but walking out of hospital, I'm thinking, I've got this bundle of joy. What the hell do you do?
What do you
Because I'd
do with it?
never,
What do I do
yeah,
with it? Yeah.
yeah,
How do I feed it?
yeah.
Where do I get nappies for? What's the
Nobody, yeah.
is this
It's,
right? Its color? What does it eat? How what am I doing it right? Is it
mm,
supposed to sleep? Is it not supposed to sleep? It's crying. It's not crying. It's
and
just
I've not got a mum. I'd not
yeah.
got
There's
my
no
mum
mum there
there.
going, don't worry. I'll show you how to
Yeah,
breastfeed. I'll show you
yeah,
how to this.
yeah,
Yeah, your body's supposed to feel that way, and it's going to
yeah,
hurt for a while, and
yeah,
you're just
mm,
fucking hell.
yeah,
That must have been. So that was 10 years ago. So
yeah,
you'd gone through different stages of you. Were you still with your partner at the time?
yeah. That, yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. Are you
That's
still?
and
Yeah.
but the thing is that I felt at the time, because that would have changed for him as well, and it were hard for him, to kind of adapt, because nobody understands the pressure. I mean, and my kind of first child just never slept. It never slept, and honestly, I was back to work within 3 months because of my role,
Yeah.
and it was just this bizarre. It was just like I kind of relate it to the jungle, really. Kind of walking around, it felt like that actually when I were in the jungle. In the feeling of tiredness were like when I had my first child. That's the only way I can associate that, because I felt absolutely exhausted, and that's
Yeah.
how when I look kind of fast forward to the jungle, it
Yeah.
were exactly the same. Just wow, exhaustion of having a baby and it never sleeping, and I were breastfeeding and everything like that, and it was just being back at work, and it was just horrendous.
How do you continue to operate when you see? Because when I listen to yourself and I listen to people that live in high pressure environments, they have an important job, they have a family to support, and we've already alluded to this cognitive load, that
Yeah,
kind of adrenal fatigue or empathy fatigue, that ability to mentally keep connecting with people or keep looking after yourself and not just burn. Have you ever suffered from burnout, or do you ever think you have?
think I have, yeah. If I go back to, especially when I'd got I mean, I've got two boys under, I literally just a 1.5, because I was kind of
Yeah.
pregnant 3 months after the first one, and having that, and then just one not sleeping and breastfeeding, and I look back and I think that 3 years from having first baby, I think that 3 years I was on total burnout. If I'm honest, when I look back, I didn't know it at the time, but when I look
How did you
back,
deal with it at the time, and what support were you? And I'm not trying to pry at all, but were
yeah,
you still with your partner at the time, and were you?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I was, but I just felt. But this is the thing, isn't it? And I think we're in a society, and I go back and it's only 10 years ago, but it was. I felt that it were a weakness to say that I needed help. Do you know what I mean? It
really.
just, yeah. And I just kind of cracked on with it. You're a mum, and again, and I think it might have been because I've not got mum list
Yeah,
back of
yeah,
me
yeah.
saying, and that's the problem because again, this, that
So no,
journey,
this isn't
just,
normal. Let's get
you
some
know,
help. Yeah,
and this is the thing. So I think at the end of the day, I didn't know that bit, and it's like I didn't really have that family support to say, well, God, you look tired, whatever. I just, Pete, because it was no,
there was
I
nobody
mean,
there to go. I'll tell you what. Let me have them for a few
absolutely not. So
hours.
it's just
Let me
like,
just.
you know what,
Yeah.
crack on and just make sure you breastfeed and make sure your sons are healthy, to the detriment of me looking after myself.
So as they got a little bit older, and as they started to be more dependent, feeding themselves, dressing
Yeah,
themselves, I'm sure they're both, functioning little
yeah,
boys now, which is great.
yeah.
How did you start to rediscover yourself, and then bring me up to kind of what made you want to apply for something ridiculous like
Yeah.
SAS?
Well, this is, I mean, it is interesting because, I mean, that I had my two, because I was, kind of, like I said, I was straight back to work 3 months, which is no time, as you know,
No
you've
time
got
at
your
all.
own kids.
Most people take a lot of time after that.
Yeah. Straight back into work. And, so when
Do
they
you think you
started
were
getting
ready to go back? Sorry.
no, I think I should. I mean, to be honest, looking back now, and I just look back at the sheer pace of life. I wish I had taken a year off with them both because it'd have been that bonding time as well. Because like I said, even at that time, I were in quite senior leadership roles at that time. So again, it puts a strain on the family when you're out at 6 o'clock every morning
You're on
and you're
beck
back.
and call. When you're at that
Yeah,
sort of level in
yeah,
organizations, you are
yeah.
expected to answer your phone at any
Oh
point.
yeah, absolutely. So kind of getting where the kind of we're walking around and now going into nursery, that did ease the burden a little bit. And as they've kind of now got their own hobbies and interests, kind of getting them to a point where they are interested in stuff, and it's not 100% that they're relying on you, because they're looking
Yeah.
forward to their own hobbies like rugby and that type of thing, skiing. And I think for me, I mean, that just one of the things that when I was younger, I went on a work experience, and I'll come back to the SAS in a minute. I went on a work experience at school when I was 14, 15, and it's basically because, week in, week out, I might have been in school, might not have been in school. But anyway, they sent me on an army work experience, and I really, really did enjoy it. I did some orienteering, I did the fitness, which I really enjoyed. And had I got GCSEs first time round, because I didn't get the GCSEs, I could only be a driver or a chef, and I didn't really want to do that in the military.
Yeah.
And so one of my reasons, for wanting to kind of join SAS is because I'm going through my 40s, so I'm having what I'd say is a midlife crisis. I would
Really?
the yeah, I didn't realise I was eldest contestant there, and I think I wanted to go into SAS just to kind of, because I knew I'd got mental resilience just because of life, just in general.
Yeah.
Um, and I think I wanted to know for me, what is it that are my strengths and what are my weaknesses, and I think that's what attracted me because I wanted to push myself to a limit, to understand that. Even though Foxy said you should have your feet up, you know, so
They
that
can't
was really
talk. I think they're all older than all of us, and they're still getting
yeah.
after it. So I think, hey,
Um,
it's just a number.
so I think for me, I wanted to just to understand what my limitations were really, and I think the attraction of that kind of fitness side of it, and actually going into an environment where you just didn't know when you were going to eat, you didn't know when you were going to sleep. So we're going back to my childhood to some
I was gonna
extent, Pete.
say, yeah, yeah, yeah. How much
I
of
didn't have a
that?
clue. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like, do you
yeah.
know what? So it's interesting because some of the other contestants were getting like really kind of high rate about, oh, when
Some
we
people
eat, but
really struggle with that lack of control, yeah, with not knowing
yeah,
when the meal was, not knowing what's next. How
and
did you find that when we got in there? We got in the dorms. You were
yeah,
back amongst people you
yeah.
didn't know.
Mm. I would just, I was fine because it was like, I go back to that's like my first day going in that children's home where I didn't know
But now you've
anybody.
got all the
Yeah.
experience and the strength and the perspective of being older than you. You know, you're not a child anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, but it's interesting because my mind just defaulted back to that children's home where let
Really?
it be. Yeah, I really defaulted back to that 9-year-old child where it was like, well, this is it. Somebody's in control now, hand it over to them. And it's interesting how I kind of my mindset. It's really weird, but it's really bizarre explaining it. But I was just like, that's it. I don't care. I'll eat when I eat. If I don't eat, I don't eat. And yeah, so I went back into that kind of it is what it
That
is
was a
kind
real secret superpower, I suppose,
of.
because you
Mm,
had been so used to having
mm,
control taken away from you.
yeah,
Did it
yeah.
not also, because then when you say, oh, it put me back in the mindset of a child, did it not also throw your mind back in every other ways around, being around people you don't know, what sort of people are they like? Can I trust them? Can I not trust them? Because you'd been conditioned when you were younger that building relationships with these people would ultimately equal pain. Whereas now, theoretically, in the SAS thing, it's where we're there as a team and we have to
Yeah.
achieve certain challenges and stuff like that. How did that dynamic work?
Well, I mean, the reality is, I think because I'm a little bit older and a little bit wiser, if you want, I were able to say to say to my mind, if you want, well, you are with people, and it's interesting because when I've started new jobs, I'm put with people that I don't know, and it's about working together. So I think at 9, I wouldn't have been able to ever kind of
Of course not.
compose those
Yeah.
thoughts or even think that. So I think having that kind of life experience made me switch off to them negative thoughts, really.
Okay.
So
Was there anybody you particularly gravitated towards, and how did you find those first few days? I mean, we all got together and we were thrown into little boats to start with, and then we had that first kind of going down that beautiful environment. How did you deal with being in Vietnam, by the way? How did you find it? Have you ever been before?
no, I've never been to Vietnam. I mean, I've been to Malaysia, but I think in relation to Vietnam, the heat, the humidity, just in relation to the amount of water that we were in and out, even on that first activity, it would just, yeah, it in some ways it was surreal because it's a country that, to be honest, Laos and Vietnam and Cambodia are countries that I've even though we didn't go to Laos and Cambodia, they're on my kind of wish list of where I want to go.
Really?
Just because, when I went to Malaysia, I went to Langkawi, and I loved the greenery, and I went into the jungle there, not doing anything like SAS, just just kind of went on a tour there. So just being in that environment, I kind of felt like I were in my element because it's such a tough environment, and compounded by then knowing the risks in it, it's like, oh my gosh, the snakes and all the dangerous spiders and everything like that. And then, so kind of going into that environment, and I think again, I think I probably saw it as a challenge really in my mind, thinking, well, not many people would cope in these hostile, because they are
Yeah.
hostile conditions. I mean, that humidity were a killer when that sun were belting down midday heat. I mean,
Yeah.
I've never experienced heat like that at all, Pete.
Yeah.
It's not like going for a run in
Couldn't
midday
escape
heat in
it.
England.
Yeah.
So I think when I knew that we were going there and when we landed there, and obviously it was that first day, I mean, we got absolutely beasted going up those stairs and everything else that we did that day
Those
and getting
stairs
that
and
water.
then carrying each other and going through the
Yeah,
swamps and getting
yeah,
leeches on you and all that sort of stuff. How did you cope
yeah.
with that first bit? Some people it was a bit of a shock and awe.
Yeah, I mean, it's really different. It's really different to the type of training that I do because I mean, marathon training is more about volume than
Mm.
intensity, really.
Yeah.
So, but in relation to, I found it hard, doing them press ups on steps and, just running up and down those steps.
Mm.
It was really, really hard work. And I think, what I found just in general is that I can do the activities, but for me, it's the kind of recovery, because it was a constant.
Yeah.
It just felt, we were doing sit ups and then press ups and then burpees and walking up those steps and everything like that. So it was like that content. I was doing it, and then what I found after that is it kind of takes me longer nowadays to recover because I'm not used to kind of high intensity
No, no,
sessions, to be
yeah.
honest. So that was total different. I was totally out of my comfort zone with those sessions.
Yeah, and they were some of the sessions. I mean, it was a few days in when we had that one of the first beastings in the square where we really
Oh,
lost two or three. We lost 3 or 4 people actually. I think we
that
lost
day, I think it
3
was
like that
4.
day, didn't we? Yeah.
Yeah.
How was your body holding up? I mean, you made it all the way to the end. So talk me through the physical side of things to start with, and how you how you maintained it? Was there any, you know, methods or strategies, or how did you keep your body? Because you're saying you were worried about the recovery aspect of it.
Yeah.
How did you keep your body going?
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting because I think when I look back from day one at that you know, kind of high intensity kind of, you know, just getting off that boat and swimming it, you know, and it's probably an exaggeration, but it felt like it was 200 meters. It felt so
It
long.
was
'Cause
a
I've not,
fair
you know,
distance. Yeah.
yeah, and then, you know, going straight into it. What I found is that, you know, the lack of sleep, you know, the kind of new environment, the environmental conditions, then compounded by the sessions, one session after another session, lifting the weight. You know, whilst I was doing those sessions, you know, I give it absolutely everything. You know, and I kind of switched my brain off. And I think to be honest, Pete, I think adrenaline took over throughout
Really?
the whole of the course. Yeah. But then what I found, you know, when we did go back to dorms and everything, I could absolutely, you know, I could feel it taking longer for my body as the days were going on. Every session, you know, I could feel joints aching, ligaments aching, you know, and then compounded by, you know, feet being in water and, you know, starting to get jungle rot setting and things like that.
Well, that
That's what,
really was a massive factor for me. I obviously killed Scott's feet, and I know people really
yeah,
struggled with their feet throughout the entire
yeah,
course, didn't they? It was a big
yeah.
factor.
Yeah, so you know, I'd started because the thing is as well. Before the course, I'd done the up at Catterick, I'd done the parachute 10 mile tab. So even before I went into jungle, my feet were kind of full of blisters on the back, and that's why you know, I'd got kind of approval to take Vaseline in because literally the back of my feet were absolutely ripped to shreds. And what
Why
and
did you
there was
chosen to do that before the course? Was that part of training for it, or
yeah,
was it
it would
something
just
different?
yeah,
Or
because it would just getting used to the weight, you know, kind
okay,
of getting used to running around with that weight. Because I don't ever do. I mean, I don't do weights. I don't have time in my life to do weights. So you know, it was a win-win-win. It was a win-win for me personally because I was running with the weight, so I had to train when I was running. You know, weeks up to that, running with that kind of 20 kilogram plus weight.
yeah,
And then, you know, because if I'd not done that, I think I'd have struggled because I weigh 55 kilogram. We were lobbing around 25 kilogram plus everything else that we were doing, Pete. So,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
I were at the extremes, as in what I was pulling my, you know, putting my body through is in weight. I could have run all day. But, you
Yeah.
know, when I start looking at the weights
I
that we were
knew that,
lobbing,
yeah, as soon as some people had some weight on their back,
yeah,
that would really
yeah,
destroy some people because it's
yeah,
such a difference between running.
yeah.
Like you could run all day, but
Oh,
when you
yeah,
start putting weight on people's
yeah,
backs, it
yeah,
just changes the whole fundamental, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah. So I think that's what the difficulty. What I, you know, it's like I were having to play mind games about that recovery and just kind of get myself psyched up for those next sessions. To be honest.
Talk to me about, I mean, you've alluded to it already,
Mm,
that Vaseline aspect, because it's something we
mm,
spoke about before we
yeah,
came on a
mm,
couple of days ago. Obviously, I
yeah,
wasn't there for the
yeah,
entirety of the course. I
mm,
blew my knee out and had a little cry and had to go home.
mm,
But how,
mm,
talk to me about that, because that seemed to be a bone of contention with other people. Because I remember when we were going in, like I took some compression leggings because I had varicose veins and stuff
yeah,
like that. So I know people did have
yeah,
a variety of, some people had insoles for their
yeah,
shoes and stuff like that.
yeah,
But there was something different about this whole Vaseline gate that really upset some people, because we were given a supply of things in the room, weren't we? There was like blister pastas and there was Vaseline and stuff in there. So talk, because you know, it's only 6 episodes. People won't
yeah,
see and they won't hear this
yeah,
conversation until it all
yeah.
comes out. That's why I wanted to give everybody an opportunity to talk about their experiences. For what people haven't seen,
Yeah.
what the frickin' hell was that all about? What was going on, and why were people so upset about it?
Yeah, so like I said, so I'd done the parachute 10 mile kind of tab that
Yeah,
literally the weekend before, and that was one of the reasons, like I said, that I'd done it because I wanted to, you know, kind of push myself. But the problem that I'd got is because Catterick is the course is really, really undulating. I wore my boots and literally it ripped both at the back of my feet.
okay,
Now, interestingly, Grant had given me some. I'd taken Vaseline over, by the way, a couple of tubs of Vaseline because it's the only way that I could kind of travel because the blister plasters just weren't, my blister plasters weren't covering.
yeah,
So Grant had given me some you know, some blister plasters to put on, and again they were just dropping off because they weren't big enough to cover the skin, and my skin were basically raw. So I the final tub that obviously we were in the hotel 4 or 5 days, so I'd kind of
yeah, the
literally when I was going
isolation.
out running and I'd use my tub because literally I was lathering my feet, and I'd got my final tub and took that in. And basically, I think it were in day three. Well, luckily on day one, I'd said to Jordan, "Look, I've got Vaseline. You know, if you start getting blisters or anything, I can't use blister plasters.
Hmm.
So if you want anything, you know, if you want any Vaseline or anything, I've got a tub of Vaseline in my box."
Yeah,
Anyway, I think it must have been day three, maybe day four, and I don't know if maybe I were putting Vaseline on my feet, or I can't remember whether Jordan had used some or whatever. And I think one of the other contestants had seen that this tub of Vaseline,
Yeah.
and it kind of, I don't know why it had caused some controversy, because I've never used any of the Vaseline that were in there, the main box anyway. I think, to be honest, I think they'd only put 2 in there.
Yeah.
And like I said, because my feet had been getting infected, that's why I could kind of take this Vaseline in. And for some reason, it just sparked off some anger, because I think other people were getting blisters, and everybody must have used it. I didn't know everybody were getting blisters. So, I mean, literally, I don't know why it had caused a controversy, but that's what that's where the Vaseline came into it.
Mm.
I think Grant had started getting, some. To be honest, I didn't understand the extent of his kind of his jungle rot on his feet.
Mm.
I didn't think it was as bad as what it was. And I just think it caused, it kind of went down like a lead balloon when I'd got this tub of Vaseline, to be honest.
But it was sad to hear, because building those relationships and trying to sustain an environment of trust and stuff like that is so crucial to helping people try and make it to the end of the course. How did things start to change? Because I remember when we spoke before, and I'm sure you won't mind me saying, like, you felt like the dynamic kind of shifted for you there. Because I was really upset to hear that you didn't necessarily enjoy some of the end of the course, despite the fact you were in such a great place doing. I mean, you were doing very well yourself, but you were in a beautiful place and part of a great thing.
Yeah, well, that kind of changed the dynamic for me, because it was like, oh, well, you're kind of hiding that away from people. I weren't hiding it away from anybody. I'd already said to Jordan, if anybody want, if you want it, get it, and stuff like that. Okay. And so I think things were blown out of perspective. But I think, in my day-to-day life, it's, I have to worry about so much things at, a kind of macro level, probably little things like that I don't even worry about, Pete.
Okay.
So it's, when things kind of escalated, I just thought to myself, well, seriously, is it, and I couldn't understand why something so simple had caused such a kind of uproar. And it's kind of going on and on and on. But, when you get, it depends where you are, doesn't it, in your life and things like that.
So as you'd had that sort of disruption with 1 or 2 members of the team, you still had quite some time left. How did those last few days, because you had some serious challenges, and I know you had a bunch more beast-ins, and then a few different people started dropping out. How did you manage to keep going to the end? And also, how did you find it with the DS? We haven't really spoken about the DS yet.
Yeah, it's interesting. In relation to how did I get to the end, I just think, I wanted to, my reason for joining this was to just push myself mentally and physically as far as I could. And I just kept going and going and going. So I was lucky that, I kind of got to the end of it, to be honest. And like I said, I mean, I didn't find it easy at all, because it was more the recovery for me, as we were doing beastings, and, the levels were stepping up, and sleep deprivation, then food deprivation coming into it. It's, it kind of messes with everything in your mind, really.
Oh, yeah, I love that.
You're not only hungry, you're tired and everything like that. But
it's
I think
such a head fuck. I love it.
What I found is, it were interesting how I had to just totally believe, and say, you can do this, and I think that probably goes back to childhood, to be honest, Pete, in that, you've got to believe in yourself, even in tough times. If I'd have believed what everybody else told me, because I remember, I remember DS Billy shouting, "Crack on, you skinny whippet," or whatever, and I'm thinking, and it's bizarre, some comments that he said to me, because I'm thinking, skinny whippet, it was just bizarre, really, and I'm thinking, well, that obviously their interpretation of me is that I've got no strength or whatever, so it was quite interesting, some of the remarks that I got from the DSs.
How did you find getting on with the DS overall? Did you have any favourites, and was there any moments of challenge, or because some people, they rubbed them up right way, some of them they just did not get on with a few of the DS? It was just, how did you find it with each of them?
To be honest, I don't think I really got close to the DSs. I probably spoke more to Foxy, because when we were doing the events, and DS Billy as well. DS Chris, actually, I ran quite a bit with him, and at last event, he really kind of helped pull me in. So, but it's interesting, because, just for the people that they are, I absolutely respect what they've done in within their, respective careers. So I've kind of gone, in kind of awe of what these guys have contributed to wider society, and, defending our countries, and obviously Rudy. defending obviously America. So it's so kind of I've got these guys on a pedestal anyway, so I absolutely respect what they say, what they do. So I think for me it was just about absorbing all the kind of great things that they were giving to the group, and I when we were doing a number of activities, like I said, I ended up kind of, it's for some reason if Foxy were with our groups, whether we were kind of doing the teamwork and some of the individual sports, and we were Foxy. So I spoke to him more, and he's kind of, it were interesting how he's kind of not really serious, and he said to me, "You're trying too hard," and it's kind of, I don't know what trying too hard is, because it's either I go back to 0 or 100%. You see, so there's no kind of in between really. But then when we were doing the Wednesday to Thursday, and it was DS Billy that were like really at the side of me and pushing the team. So I really did like the kind of feedback that they were giving. But it's hard, when you're doing leaderships and you've got him screaming, you've got the team, and it's that kind of gave me a new kind of insight, because I've not been in a leadership role and had as much screaming. Which were bizarre.
It really is a strange micro study on how to deal with people in very pressurized environments. And to be honest, a lot of it doesn't carry over into normal life, because for example, how I operate on the incident ground would not work very well in a corporate environment, because it just, people are in a different level, people are in a different mindset, the expectations and the cost is very different as well. How did you find some of the physical beatings towards the end? Because I wrote down one of the things we discussed around carrying weight and how you dealt with carrying weight, because there was a few people early on in the course where, like, we had the water bottles poured over our heads and we had to get our bags to a certain weight and stuff like that. That all changed throughout the entirety of the course, and I know it became a bone of contention as we got later on in the course, where there was big discrepancies in people's weights of their rucksacks and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what's intrigued me, though, because it was really interesting, because I know Foxy said twice to me that my weight were under whatever 20 kilograms.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because on both occasions, me and Steve did my bag and measured that bag, and it was like over 20 kilograms. It was 21 kilograms, in fact. When Steve? Foxy said, yeah, me and Steve, and we.
Steve left after a couple of days. That must have been really early on.
Yeah, well, me and Steve did 5 bags on the first tranche. We did 5 bags, so we could not understand why there were discrepancy. And then on the second one, everybody's bags were wet through anyway. So I and I can't understand that. I don't know if we were doing that to wind up, because why did I not get any sanctions for that then?
Yeah, that was the bit, because when
if you remember, I think that Foxy were doing that to wind up, because when the waters weren't, we had to put our. So if you're telling me that was 7 kilograms under, why were there no punishment for that? And that's what and this is what I'm saying. We've got to go back.
7 is that, because obviously I wasn't there. Is that what I said it was?
13 kilograms. Yeah, but why were there no punishment?
Do you think that was a head game then? Do you think that was?
I think Foxy were doing that with me for a head game. Yeah, I do, honestly.
Even despite the fact you'd already gone through some challenges and setbacks with the team anyway, did that feel fair, or did you feel singled out at all with that?
I felt a bit singled out, really, because,
How did you feel as you were coming into the final 24 hours? Because I was speaking with Rosie this morning, and she was great, but she said those last bits where she had to take her boots off and then she had to put them back on without any socks on, and that last 24 hours was what broke a few people. How did you find that interrogation phase and then finally getting to the end?
Do you know what? It's really interesting, because for me, that interrogation were the one thing that I probably went into the SAS obviously show thinking, wow, I've got no idea how I'm going to come out of that, and genuinely, because you can't prepare for that. No. And in all honesty, followed by, and I go back to, the lack of sleep, the lack of food, really, because I think that the show will only ever, people will see what they want to see, and it might be 10
You'll see a tiny amount. There'll be so much that people will not see. That's why I think it's so great to have these conversations, because people will be like, what? I never saw that on the show. Well, you fucking won't. You'll miss so much.
Oh, no. And I think for me, I did not expect that to be as tough. And I genuinely mean this, Pete. I mean, from us getting captured to going down, obviously, and we'd not slept. I mean, because you've got to look up to what happened. We were building them, moving sandbags all around the base. Camp, sorry, from one side of the camp to the other side of camp. Well, not only did we do that morning, they were draining every little ounce of energy out of us. We were doing the wrestling. So all this build up to, escape and evasion, it was significant. So, every one of us, so if you put that into perspective, so we'd kind of slept, probably 30 odd hours before we got to that. And, them being, kind of everything that we were doing were purposely draining us. And then, kind of getting kind of captured and then getting walked down into the camp again, obviously. And then just going into this environment that none of us would have been, accustomed to. Yeah. So, having the masks on and having the glasses, you can hardly breathe. And honestly, if they put the goggles on your nose so far down, you're struggling to breathe. It's unbelievable. And then claustrophobia sets in then, and it's dark. You've got no idea. You've got these dogs barking. And honestly, I've never ever experienced anything like that. And it's a total mind game, absolute mind game. And,
how did you get through it then?
Well, in relation to, I work, obviously everybody's experiences are different, but I went straight into stress positions and a dental drill. And honestly, it were at a frequency that every orifice, every cut that I'd got on my hand from the course, and every bruise were just like vibrating and thumping because,
really?
I didn't expect it to be like that. And honestly, I reckon, and it might not have even been 2 hours, it might have been 20 minutes into interrogation. And I thought to myself, I don't know how I'm going to go through this for 24 hours. Genuinely, it was just horrendous. And then I kind of got to a point, because I got to a point in my head where I thought, right, I've got to start switching these negative thoughts. And I've totally switched my mind. And at that point, I was fighting with the stress positions that I were in. And I'm having to battle. And every time I moved, I got hit by a stick, not hit by a stick, but it felt like a stick, but the guy putting you back in. And it was just absolutely, it was gruesome, honestly. Every muscle and body were aching. And then, as you alluded to, we'd had to take his socks off, boots, and we'd just got these overalls, and it were absolutely red hot. Plus, you'd got this mask on all the time, and it was so uncomfortable. But then getting kind of pulled into interrogation, and you've got this cover story, and it's kind of you just on your mind all the time. It's like, oh God, I can't forget this. I can't forget this. And I just reflect back and I look at, again, I suppose it comes from that kind of childhood, just thinking there's an end to this. There's going to be an end to this. I mean, in reality, if you were in that situation in war, there's never going to be an end to it. And I just kept thinking to myself in my mind that it's going to end. 24 hours, it's going to end. And just having that just kind of drove me on. And I just switched out of this mode to the point where I'd kind of, any muscle that were aching just went. It were like my body were numb, so I didn't understand what were hurting me anymore. Everything when I went into interrogation, all I could do was just switch my brain and just talk open and honestly, and just give the facts and figures of what I were allowed to do until the point where I were at risk, or an individual that I was at risk with, and it's just it's how can I describe it? It was like I was just in this zone, like when you're getting ready for a marathon or a sport event, and I was just in this zone. It was like pure adrenaline. It was absolutely bizarre. And I've never, ever done anything as hard in my life, honestly. Never.
Which is a statement considering some of the stuff you've been through. How did you cope with some of the interrogators? Because they started to try and like pit different members of the team against each other as well, didn't they?
Oh, yeah. It was difficult. I mean, they were very smart individuals. And I think when you're exhausted, you could really get pulled into it. You could really get pulled into it. And it's kind of, I was just having to like, right, okay, you're tired, but stop and think. And I wouldn't kind of play the game. I wouldn't play the game. So I never, because one of the sessions I was, being asked about the leader and, kind of criticising, and I was adamant that no, I had a great leader and everything else. And I would not.
Who was the leader for that one?
Danica with the leader on ours. And I was, so I wouldn't go against, because I knew then they'd start creating this divide.
Trying to pull each other apart from each other.
Yeah. And I just didn't play.
Yeah. Did you see that happen at all with any other members of the team? Because a few people reflect back on that interrogation as where things started to unravel. Because I think Danica got removed from it, didn't she?
Yeah. Because I think I've heard that she started. I think she said that she didn't know why I was there. I don't know exactly
why you were there.
What as in her team, as in the activities for her team. So I think that created a divide or something from what I was told, but I don't know. I never saw it. I won't ever see it until obviously we see, unless it's filmed. I've got no idea.
That's strange. How did you find coming right to the end? Because you actually made it to the very end with everybody. There was four of you, wasn't there?
Yeah, that were really difficult because literally, no, we come out of interrogation. We're basically, I mean, I'd bandaged all my feet up at that point, and I'd put a bandage on one of them and then the tape on the other, and we were straight out with the rucksacks on, literally.
Ah, did they let you bandage your feet after that bit?
Yeah, but that was the worst thing I could have done, Pete, because I
Really? Because
taped.
Rosie said she wished she'd have asked for bandages on her feet at that point.
Oh, this is after interrogation,
Oh, sorry. Okay.
not in interrogation. This is after. So when obviously when the four of us come out on interrogation, um, basically they let us go back to the room. We had some water because obviously water were limited throughout that
Yeah.
period, and oh God, I was absolutely I felt dehydrated, to be honest. And basically, I wrapped my feet up with a tape, and then I put a bandage on the other foot, my right foot, and that was the worst thing I could have done. I should have just taped it up because the bandage bulged, and it
Oh,
was like
really?
literally I'd got it. Yeah, I mean, yeah, and literally the bandage had bulged right in the center of my foot. I mean, I didn't know that at the time,
Yeah.
but literally, kind of DS came in and said, right, we're going, and the four of us, got rucksacks on and we were having to race with the ammunition box, and
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. I thought we'd finished after. I thought that was done after interrogation, honestly. And we had to run up that massive hill as well. We ran up that massive hill again,
Yeah.
and then from there, um, we had we were moved on a bus, and then we got where we'd got the sandbags on, and oh God, the heat was absolutely pounding down. It was one of those days where you thought, I wish the clouds on it were raining.
Yeah.
And so we'd got, and bearing in mind we'd not slept, and this is like literally after interrogation. And then we'd got like a sprint for about a mile, and oh, that were harder than the interrogation, to be honest. My bandage
Really?
had bulged up by the time we'd got to the last run. I mean, I had DS Chris running with me alongside me when I'd got the sandbag, and I absolutely just like ran as fast as I could, and it absolutely exhausted me. And then by the time I'd got to the run for the mile, my foot were just like literally in bits. And then once we'd done, we kind of all got through on the boats, and then we were literally having to climb up a rope to get up a hill. And it was like, I can't
Bloody
believe we're
hell.
doing this after interrogation. It was just just because I thought in my own head, I thought we'd done serious. I thought interrogation that we're done. So I
I think
didn't
as everybody
expect
thought, wasn't it?
anything like that. Yeah, yeah. So
What
it were
happened right at the end? Because everybody passed,
yeah,
but they didn't. No, so everybody finished the course, but they didn't pass you for it.
yeah. So I've got no idea. I don't know. I don't know why we're not passed. I don't know. I've got no idea.
How did you feel after that? Because I would have puzzled my mind. I'd have had a million questions. I'd have at least wanted to understand what about my performance or my behavior or my values or my character, or what was it that, because ultimately you still traveled the same journey as everybody
Yeah,
else.
yeah.
How did you feel about
Um, well, I mean, I didn't really get any feedback, to be honest. I didn't get any feedback at all. And I think the reality is because I was the last one on the run, I think that's one of the elements of it. I don't know. I never got any feedback.
that? Oh, you last one to finish the run aspect of it, were you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
So it was the first win. But like I said, on that run, because my bandage had
yeah.
come up, there were no way, I just couldn't run.
Fucking hell, that must have been crazy. I'm so
Yeah.
envious to you guys for having made it all the way to the end. It must have been such an amazing journey. How have you felt coming out of it and sort of recalibrating with life and reintegrating back into your world? Have you had a shift of perspective? How do you look at things now? How do you feel, and what has it done for you?
Yeah, well, I think, for me, obviously we've got, kind of couple of days to kind of decompress if you want, which were nice, to
Mm.
put things into perspective and to,
Was everybody
go.
together for that?
Well, we all had our own rooms,
Okay.
obviously,
Yeah.
kind of in the hotel and things like that. And then, it was just nice just to get the food and, just the
Oh yeah.
mango smoothie and the chocolate cake and, well, passion cake and everything like that
Yeah.
were absolutely, that it were amazing just to get, what you take for granted, really, just having a mango smoothie.
Yeah.
So I think for me, it was quite a surreal 2 day. Well, it were 1 and a bit days, really, just to kind of take everything in, really. And I think, I mean, if I look at my reasons for going in the show and where I got as an individual, I think I've kind of, I think the expectations were that I'd never get to the end anyway in my own mind, because I didn't think I'd be strong enough. I mean, I wanted to, but I
Yeah.
always thought that the limiting factor would be my body with this weight, because like I said, 55 kg versus everything else that we were carrying. I never thought I'd get there, Pete. So I think in that respect, I think I surpassed my own expectations of, kind of doing what we did. In relation to the course, yeah, I am glad that I did it. I mean, it taught me a lot, just in general about people, just kind of throwing people together. I wish that we would have had the opportunity to kind of meet before we got put into into the course, really.
What
But
did it teach
obviously,
you about people? You say about people and throwing people together. What did
well,
it teach you
I go
about it?
back. I go back to this kind of forming, storming, norming, performing, and
Okay.
what I saw in there is, well, we were stuck in. Everybody comes from a different perspective, and in relation to some individuals who were clashing with staff, for example, why it was that, because I just couldn't in my own mind. I couldn't understand why, you'd clash with staff,
There
really
was a
knowing
couple of
what.
people tried some, very silly remarks and behaviour early on in the course, and you thought, "Fucking wind your neck in. What the fuck are you doing?
I know. Yeah, so
Shut up."
I wouldn't understand that, I kind of saw the best and worst in people, really. I think, the things like, for me, experiencing that with Vaseline, seriously, in the grand scheme of things, is that, I think for me, it's like I never had a problem with anybody, really, but, just that Vaseline, how nasty people got. And,
Really?
yeah. So that was quite interesting, just
To
with the fact.
pause for a second and try and get some perspective, placing yourself in their shoes, because again, sorry, but I obviously wasn't there. So why can you put yourself in that position? Why do you feel like whoever it was got so passionate about things like that, or whatever the things were, the rucksacks or anything like that? Why was that such a bone of contention for people, do you think?
Well, I think in relation to Vaseline, I've got no idea, because there were Vaseline in the box or whatever. I never used it anyway.
Hmm.
In there for other people. So I'd brought the Vaseline in specifically, like you'd bought your leggings in for
Yeah.
for your veins and stuff.
Hmm.
So I don't, I don't, that's why I struggled.
But that nastiness took you by surprise, did it?
I said, yeah, I suppose so. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
What did you learn about yourself coming at the end of it? You say you've learned more about other people and their behaviors. Is there anything coming out of it that is going to change for you? Have you, do you look at things differently now? Has it motivated you? Has it inspired you? Has it scared you? What has it done for you in how you move forward? Because you said before that you thought you were in this midlife crisis.
Yeah.
I don't think you're midlife at all yet, but
Yeah.
how does that look for you now coming out of it, having proven to yourself that you can do something like that?
Yeah, well, I think in relation to what it will do, I suppose in my role in industry, it's interesting, because when I saw kind of behaviours and individuals, it's what it did is it kind of reinforced those kind of concepts, if you want. Like I say, Tuckman's putting people together, putting teams together, that kind of forming stage, storming, norming, and then high performing. I saw that happen, but not really getting to kind of high performing teams. But within the amount of time that we were in there, you'd have never got to that anyway. But
No.
all those team dynamics and individual dynamics, that were quite interesting, because I thought, wow, this is interesting. I
Mm.
think in relation to what did I learn about myself? Yeah, in relation to, I suppose, being absolutely exhausted. I suppose I'm not saying starving, but being kind of undernourished at some points, and having to fight those kind of mind games. I were able to turn that round, and I think the pressures that we've got in industry, in global industry at the minute, you know with what individuals are facing, you can get through that type of stuff with working with your leadership team, working with your team to kind of get through that. So I think that's what that's taught me.
It has been an incredible experience for so many people, and I've been fascinated listening to,
Mm.
yourself, but also everybody about what their takeaways have been. Because everyone's as we sort of said at the beginning, everyone's at such different chapters of their life, and I'm really excited. I know by the time this comes out, everyone will have seen all the episodes anyway, but we're still yet to get together again, the whole sort of team and everything like that. Hopefully, it'll be some point at the end of this year, and it'd be great to just see everybody and hopefully continue to support each other as we face these different varying challenges, because like you've got growing boys now, you're stepping into a really independent part of your life where they're not reliant on you as much. You've got these big races coming up. It'll be super exciting to see what you do amongst everybody else. But I really want to thank you for taking time this morning.
Yeah.
I know we've tried a little bit for getting some time together, so I really appreciate that. I know it's the weekend, and taking that few hours out of your life is a lot, so I really appreciate it.
No problem, Pete. No, thank you very much.
All right, I'm going to send my love to the family and give everybody a big cuddle from me, and I really look forward to catching up again soon.
Lovely. See you soon, Pete. Bye.
Firefighters podcast is put together to develop, inspire, and hopefully even motivate those individuals who have chosen to serve our communities and be part of the first responder family. It's brought to you by myself, operational firefighter Pete Wakefield. If you have enjoyed today's episode and you want to see the podcast continue, please head over to our Patreon page where you can support the ongoing efforts of the podcast. Please hit that follow, subscribe, or rate button on whatever platform you're listening to. Please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.